Welcome to Speed Up Your WordPress website. My name is Dante St. James. I'll be hosting you through this particular class, which is a not too in-depth, but also not too basic look at how to get better speed out of your pages loading on your WordPress site. And specifically, if you're using a WordPress site to be able to be hosted on your own hosting. So if you're using your own web hosting as opposed to WordPress.com, this is the right place to be, particularly if you're being told that, wow, these web pages are yours, they're really slow to load. So we're going to be hopefully improving that a little bit for you with some simple and some more in-depth tips as well. Let's get started. The majority of searchers, this is a sad fact and an indictment on humanity really, would rather spend another 60 seconds searching again on Google than waiting 12 seconds for your page to load. I learned that the hard way with some e-commerce sites and some service sites that were taking way too long to load. So what the answer to that is to try and make it so that we are able to more successfully get your pages to load faster, and through that be able to get yourself a higher rank on Google as well, which is ultimately what you want, is more search results, isn't it? Secondly, this is brought to you by Business Station and the Digital Solutions Program, an initiative by the Australian Government. It's enabling you to access professional and high-level digital support for your small business without the huge amount of costs that come with that. We'll have more about that at the end of this presentation. You'll also be able to watch this on YouTube later on, either through my own channel, which is called Dante St. James, or your own, which is Business Station. If you search for Business Station, there's literally hundreds of videos just like this one they'll be able to watch. And if you are watching this on YouTube rather than live on Zoom right now, please feel free to drop us a like or a comment down below and we'll answer those. And even a subscription will be mad, because that'll allow us to deliver more stuff to your inbox in YouTube so you can be more aware of when this good stuff starts to appear. So what we're going to cover over this session is choosing the right mix up front. So if you had a magic wand, you could start all over again, what you would choose up front. Secondly, we'll look at on-page optimization. Third, technical optimization, which is looking a bit more of the bits that are a little harder to understand for many small business owners, but I'm hoping I can demystify some of those for you. And the impact of hosting and content delivery networks. I'll also have some findings on the very end, which are basically how I was able to reduce my page loading time and the real business result that gave me, which is certainly quite impressive when you consider how much that just a couple of seconds of that saving people a load can actually affect your business. First of all, my background is with my business as Clickstarter, a digital marketing agency for Northern Australia, DanteStJames.com, which is an upcoming online learning platform, and Cellular One, which is my mobile phone and NBN internet reseller business. I've studied at the University of New South Wales, Sydney, with a Bachelor of Communications and Media and a Masters of Digital, I've got that right now, Masters of Business Information Systems, sorry, that came out of that degree as well. Studied quite extensively with the Chartered Institute of Marketing with their various qualifications. TAFE New South Wales for some micro qualifications, which has allowed me then to go and become a LinkedIn marketing professional. Several things with Facebook's Blueprint program, which I'm now with Meta and Facebook as one of their contracted trainers, 5 of us in Australia. MBM Business Accredited Advisor, started up the recent Startup Territory, working as an entrepreneurship facilitator and working with Google's Digital Springboard program as well. Enough about me. Let's get on with the good stuff. First up, when it comes to WordPress and page speed, you've got to look at what the options are for making better choices in the first place. So if you really had the opportunity to go back in time and use your magic wand and I guess start all over again on a WordPress website, what are the choices you could make that could make it a much faster and more successful website? Well, the first thing to look at is fast web hosting. And fast web hosting is delivered by choosing not the cheapest option, but obviously something that's you get what you pay for. So looking for something that's a little bit, not so much pricey, but feature packed. And when I say feature packed, I'm not talking about bells and whistles. I'm talking about the features that matter most with web hosting. And that is when it's in an Australian location, or at least that it's using mirrors of your website or copies of your website and spreading them all across the internet as a CDN or content delivery network. So Australian content delivery network locations that are close to where your customers are, and Australian locations good as well. Although this is all very much in case you are trying to reach just an Australian market. If you're looking to reach a worldwide market, then that content delivery network being in Australia and also in other countries where your customers may be begins to be a much more important factor. And something that's universal, doesn't matter where you are, is that your web host has the latest technical stack. That will make a bit more sense in just a moment. So we're looking at Australian hosting, primarily looking at, I guess, your business that wants to reach customers that are in either in your local area or somewhere in Australia. That could be across Brisbane, Perth, Darwin, Alice Springs, anywhere in Australia as a local area. But also if your customers are all over the place. If they're sitting in South Australia, Tasmania, Sydney, Melbourne, the whole of Northern Australia, the East Coast, the West Coast, the South Coast, the North Coast, doesn't matter where they are, you want to reach them wherever they are. And the reason you would use Australian hosting is because there are less interconnect points between you and your customers. Let's just say you've got a website that is hosted in Ukraine. So that's nothing wrong with Ukraine web hosting if your customers were in Eastern Europe or Russia. They're very, very close to that server hosting. And so there's not many jumps, not many points that your data has to go through to get to that customer. But if you're located in Australia and your customers are located in Australia, then having Ukraine web hosting means that there's dozens of jumps that data has to do through lots of different cables, lots of different interconnect points to get that website through to your customers. So having Australian hosting means it's so much easier for you to be able to reach your customers as fast as possible using, I guess, a point of presence for your website that's in the same place as where your customers happen to be. The other advantage we've got, of course, with Australian hosting is you get really good quality support in local time. Now, how important is that? You won't notice it until you have to use it. And if you ever had to use support from a web host and your web host support is in Europe or America, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Whilst their business hours may be great for them, unless they've got 24/7 support, you're kind of a little bit stuck in Australia as being completely out of their time zone. So what we recommend is that Australian hosting gives you Australian support hours as well. Now, most of these are open 24/7, but it's a bit of a skeleton staff overnight and it may be acknowledged but not actioned until the next morning. The Australian hosting points are generally best served when they're in places like Sydney, Perth, and soon in Darwin as well. The reason for this is that the internet pipes that come into Australia, so the cables, the international interconnect cables that come into Australia, most of them, the vast majority of them come in through Sydney. There's plans to have them coming in other places, but Sydney is the place where they come through. There's none that go in through Melbourne except for the Basslink cable that goes to Tasmania, but just about all of them come into Sydney. There are some that come into Perth though, and very soon there's going to be 2 coming into Darwin, and I'm told also one also in Maroochydore in southeast Queensland on the Sunshine Coast. So that means that there's going to be a few less hops that they have to take. So therefore, the data centers that are serving your data and that are serving your websites are either going to be in Sydney, Perth, Darwin, or Maroochydore from the near future. Right now, just about all of them are based in Sydney. Some are based in Perth though. So if you use some Australian web hosting, such as Venture IP, SiteGround, and Digital Pacific, they place your data in Sydney. And in case of Digital Pacific, I think they've also got a mirror in Brisbane and another one in Perth. So when it comes to the location of your server in Australia, it's not quite so important or vital to be in the same city unless you've got huge uptime and availability requirements for millions and millions of visitors every day. It's not really a big deal, but it is a big deal when it comes to the difference between hosting your data on your website in Australia or hosting it somewhere in Europe, particularly because our interconnect with Europe is actually quite poor, or in America, where even though we've got good connection with them, it's still nowhere near as good as having that connection here within Australia. Next up, we then look at the factor with content delivery networks. Now, what is a content delivery network? A little bit of a harder one to work out. Content delivery networks basically deliver a copy of your website. So they cache your pages and put it in lots of different servers around the world. For an example, Jetpack, Cloudflare, and Bunny.net don't just put your website in Australia, they will put it in several locations in Australia. So far, they're serving the whole of the East Coast. So you've got Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, in some cases, Canberra, and in the Gold Coast as well. Then as you move across, they've also got presences in Adelaide and in Perth as well. So all of these have a presence there. So for instance, if I was hosting my website in Sydney, but I am in Perth, I would be viewing a version of that website which has been downloaded from Perth. So it'd be much, much faster if my site was mirrored through bunny.net or Cloudflare or Jetpack, where all these places seem to have they have locations of their servers in those places. Now that's to make it faster, to make it easier for your data, for your website to be viewed and much faster across the internet, rather than having to go back to your website hosting all the time, which just causes you to have a whole lot of extra data use and bandwidth use, which of course you've only got a limited amount with when you have web hosting. So if you want to be able to avoid excess charges for that, it can be really helpful to have your hosting backed up by a content delivery network. And this is particularly valid for WordPress, which can have some fairly bloated and slow pages on it. Then when we come to the technical stack, this is where we decide that whether you need particular technical requirements with your web host to serve a good website quickly. And that technical stack will involve PHP, which is the language that the website's written in, of version 7.4 or 8. 8 is a little bit not correct with when it comes for a lot of very new websites that have old plugins in them. So some of those old plugins and themes may not work correctly with PHP 8 right now, but PHP 7.4 is the current supported version. So you should be running that regardless of your website being old. Nginx and Lightspeed are the best server software as opposed to Apache, because they're much faster, they can handle a lot more, and they're generally these days used mostly in web hosting environments rather than Apache, but it's worth checking. And then having something like cPanel or an alternative like cPanel with your web host. So for instance, in Venture IP that I use quite extensively across my clients, they have a cPanel interface, which is allows you to interact with things like setting up your email addresses, your file manager for your website files, some setup options for WordPress and other systems, and I guess places where you can make the changes to your PHP setting as far as the modules that add extra capability to your web service, or the version of it, say 7.4 or 8, depending on what kind of website you've got and how able it is to be able to handle new versions of that software. I'll have a bit more on this a bit later on, because it does sound like technical gobbledygook when you just brush over it like this. So I promise you, it will be made a lot clearer soon. The other thing you want your web host to have is great backups. If they don't do backups, just leave them. It's not worthwhile. Relying upon you and your WordPress plugins like Backup Buddy or any of those other services that do it within WordPress is not the way to do backups. You want to know that your web host has those backed up so you can attach them and get them restored, or whatever you need to do, restore them or download them really quickly and really easily. And trusting a WordPress plugin is just like trusting the 18-year-old next door to look after your house when you go on holidays. It might work, it might not, but if things do go very wrong, they go terribly, terribly wrong. So rely upon your web host, not on your WordPress plugins, to do those backups. And make sure that it's a nightly backup. All the quality web hosts that I work with, SiteGround, Venture IP, Digital Pacific, they all do nightly backups. I go over to some of the cheaper versions that I've used, like Fast Comet and some others, and they don't unless you set it up, which is just ridiculous. We all should have nightly backups, regardless of what the web hosting service is. So make sure that we're able to have those nightly backups simply by using a better web host that does it for you. And then ensure that your web host is actually doing. Check them once every so often just to see if there are some backups that are already set up. When we look at monitoring, this is another important aspect of you knowing whether your site is up and down and how reliable that website is. It's important for you to not only understand the reliability of the website, but for it to be reliable in the first place. I can tell you now, There is almost daylight between the most reliable web hosts and the others. I use a $4 a month web hosting service for multiple staging sites. It's located in the UK. And at that price, I expect that I'm not going to get a great service. It goes down all the time. The software is never updated as quick as I'd like it to be. So the monitoring side of things becomes important. So you need to take some kind of level of that on yourself. How do you do that? With systems, of course. I'm not expecting you to go in there every 60 seconds, look at your website to see if it's up. You've got systems for that. The Jetpack system, which is free with WordPress, it's actually a WordPress official plugin. When you put that in there, it's got a monitoring service. It will check with the website every 60 seconds to make sure that your website is still up. Then there's WPMU Dev, which is the stack that I use. This particular system allows us to be able to monitor hundreds and hundreds of websites all over the country and all over the world, which gives us a really good insight into what websites are up, down, what their performance is like, and also doing things as fancy as keeping plugins, themes, and the WordPress core files up to date. So there's no chance a hackers will get in. There's no opportunity for vulnerabilities to be exposed and taken advantage of. So we use WPMU Dev. It's a little on the expensive side. I'll warn you about that, but gosh, it does a great job. And it also handles our backups if we need a third measure of backups as well. Managed WP is also a very, very good system, a lot less expensive than WPMU Dev, with a few less features as well. But what it does allow you to do is monitor various sites. It doesn't have to be just one. You can monitor all your different sites, and it will also go so far as helping you to manage the plugins, the themes, and the core updates that come through from WordPress. So it'll tell you when they're due, give you an opportunity to hit one button, and it'll then be able to load them up. Jetpack, though, for monitoring is more than enough to monitor whether your sites are live or not. But when it comes to doing extended things like updating theme files and updating your core files and updating your plugin files, then you might want something a bit more robust like WPMU Dev or Managed WP. When it comes to your themes, we tend to choose themes that we like the look of, but we don't tend to choose themes based on much else but how pretty they are, which leads us into a few problems, particularly if the developer doesn't update their themes very often. If they let old versions of their themes sit around for too long, that they require a particular kind of PHP on the server or a particular kind of server configuration to be present. And then when that updates and becomes no longer supported, those themes will fall down and parts of your website are just not going to work. So updates and frequent updates from developers when WordPress has a security update, when different plugins have security updates, when your web server software that you won't even know is having an update, then you'll be able to be really, really comfortable in the knowledge that your site will continue to look great year after year after year because they're sending through those updates. Now, if you're not actually doing those updates, even though they're sending them through, you're leaving yourself very vulnerable. So get those updates done and only work with theme providers that provide a record of lots of updates. And if you're getting it from someone like Theme Forest or Elegant Themes, they have change logs that will tell you how often they've made changes to their themes. Theme developers and page builder developers that are constantly providing fresh updates are the best ones to use because you know that your website will be safe for years to come. Now, the other thing I would really suggest you do for the sake of making sure that your themes are fast is to read the reviews. I have a number of clients who like to use Avada themes. Unfortunately, Avada are not very good at page speed when it comes to their themes. Their themes are very heavily and loaded with very pretty stuff, lots of animations, lots of slideshows, all that sort of good stuff. The problem is, though, that all that stuff adds to the bloat, which slows down the website. So when the website's slower, your rank on Google is going to be lower. So if you want to get a better rank on Google, you need to have themes that are light and breezy and able to upload quickly. There's several ways we'll look at a little bit later in this webinar that will lead you to how to do that. But the first step is always read the reviews, see what the users have to say about page speed. Look at that, what they have to say about why is this running so slow, or support requests. Support forums are a great source of information when it comes to how these things work in the real world. Yes, they look pretty, but that's only part of the issue. What you also need is for those things to be um, given a technical look as well by someone who's actually using those themes in the real world, not just the demo version that the theme or page builder developer has put on their site. The third theme consideration you need to make is that most themes these days are not built as themes as much as they're built as page builders. They're using plugins such as Beaver Builder or Elementor, or themes such as Divi that allow you to build essentially your own layout, or to work with other layouts that allow you then to drag and drop elements in and out of the page or the post to make it just look better. Now, these page builders have changed everything. I work with them every day, particularly with Divi and Elementor, and a little bit with Avada and with WP Bakery Composer as well, Page Composer as well. Not all page builders are equal, and I'll be looking at that a little bit later as well, so you can choose a page builder that works best for you. My recommendation isn't necessarily the fastest thing. It's for the one that allows me to build the better sites faster, but it may not be the fastest loading, but there's ways around that with other tools, and we'll explain that soon as we get to that section. Now, the page builders include Avada, WP Bakery Page Builder, which is often just called Page Builder these days. Elementor is incredibly popular, probably the number one. Divi, which is probably about number two, and then Beaver Builder, which is becoming increasingly more prominent and important in there. Now, these page builders allow you to either build themes of your own, such as in Divi, you can build your own pages. Elementor, you can build your own pages, or they come with built-in theme libraries. So Divi, for instance, you install Divi as a theme and it gives you access to hundreds of different page layouts and dozens of different overall website layouts for every kind of page you can think of, from the about page to the pricing page to the blog page to the home page and even landing pages. So what all these have in common is that they have the potential to slow down your website. Whilst they are great tools and they've really revolutionized the speed at which we're able to build websites, their problem is that, well, some of them slow down your website quite considerably. So if I look at a comparison now in ease of use, Divi is by far the easiest to use, and it's an elegant and beautiful solution for building websites. Avada, not so great. WP Bakery, yeah, not so great. Elementor is a little bit technical, and you have to have an understanding of lots of different WordPress concepts to use it well, but once it's in, it's great to use. Beaver Builder is remarkably easy to use as well. Again, they've taken the sort of approach that Divi's taken, and they've decided to create something which is it's a joy to use and really interesting and fun to use as well. So depending on what you're going to do, it can come down to ease of use and the lack of a learning curve. If you really don't want much of a learning curve, Divi's great. If you want more of a learning curve and you're willing to attack things that are a bit more granular, then your Avadas, Bakeries, and Elementors are very good for that as well. But the next screen tells a different story. And this is the speed, the access to support. Now, Divi and Beaver are paid. Elementor has a free version, so the support's not so great. Avada and WP Bakery are largely delivered through ThemeForest, which is Envato, which is like a third-party company that resells a lot of this stuff. So it can be difficult to find really good support for Avada and WP Bakery, but Elementor has quite good support. It's just that there is a free version and there is a paid version. So in the paid version, obviously the support is miles ahead of what the free version is. But when it comes to Divi, it is a paid thing anyway. There's only a paid version of Divi. You can build your own pages with the basic Divi builder, but to get the plugin or the theme to go in, you kind of need to go through a paywall to buy it. So I could give you a copy of that and you could build pages from scratch, but you wouldn't be able to access all the library of pre-built pages that the paid version can get. Same with Beaver Builder, a very similar thing. So they've got excellent access to support. This next one, though, tells a different story in terms of the page speed. So Avada has been really bashed a lot lately for being really slow when it comes to page loading speeds, which is vital to consider when you're in this world of what is called the Web Core Vitals, which are part of Google's way of ranking your website. They want to look at the Web Core Vitals are basically all about how quick do certain things happen on your website, such as the ability to be able to respond, to a request to load the site, then the speed at which the site responds, and then the speed at which the first, what they call the contentful paint. So there's content is painted, and then content is usable, and then the whole thing is loaded. The quicker all those things happen, the better you're going to rank. So as we've been looking at different web hosts, now we look at the WordPress page builders that make that more possible. Avada is very, very slow on this. They are not getting any better. In fact, they seem to be getting worse. Elementor sites have been becoming exceedingly slow lately as well, which is a bit of a concern because they used to be one of the ones that were a shining star about how light their pages were. WP Bakery is better than Elementor when it comes to loading. They've had a lot of improvements. Divi has had a lot of improvements as well. They're certainly better than Elementor and way better than Avada at the moment. Divi used to be super slow, bloated pages, slow to load. They've increased the efficiency of the way they store their code, and they've increased the speed at which their pages can be rendered on a web browser much, much more in the last year. So it's been a significant improvement. Otherwise, Divi was once upon a time way down the bottom. It was the slowest in page loading in every single scenario. And then with Beaver Builder, they've become remarkably quick. They've built this particular version of the page builder, which is out of the box, really quick to load your pages. All of these, though, pale in comparison to a less commonly used page builder called Oxygen. Oxygen is not on this list because it's got a bit more of a learning curve. It's a lot harder to use. So Oxygen isn't on this list for those reasons, yet it would probably outdo Beaver Builder and Bakery and Divi by almost 2 times. Those pages are so much faster to load, to the point where I'm actually considering learning more about Oxygen Page Builder so that I can start to use it for more of my clients' websites, because it's that much quicker and a much better technology, but it is harder to learn how to use it. So for a small business, you may need a bit of a brain space here for you. Most of your page speed issues caused by what we call the page builders can be offset by using tools like minification of your code and the use of content delivery networks to deliver those pages for you. So if you're using a CDN like Cloudflare, Jetpack, or Bunny.net, then you've got the ability to be able to deliver your things much quicker anyway. So you don't have to worry quite so badly about the weaknesses of various page builders between one and the other. Then the takeaways for this section, then we're talking about web hosting being incredibly important. We also talked about understanding the technology and understanding the stack that they're using, the stack being the collection of different tools they use to build their web hosting platform and deliver your websites to the world. And you also need to understand the impact of themes to slow down your pages and page builders as well. In the next one, we're going to be looking more into some of the things you can do on page to do better on Google, but also to just have a faster loading WordPress page. So on-page optimization is all about optimizing for speed with things that you can do on the page of your WordPress site. So these are not necessarily technical aspects. These are the things you should do on your pages. And because these are rather simple and some of them are very common sense, I'm going to do them in like a top 10. So here's 10 ways you can optimize your website on WordPress for much faster page loading. Number 1, please ditch the slideshow. Slideshows add little or nothing to your website, and there's something that's sort of overhung from the early 2010s. They were very popular when desktop websites were still the majority of the way that we accessed things online. These days, a majority, well over 80% of all data is accessed through, unless it's through Netflix, of course, on a mobile phone. But even Netflix is consumed hugely through mobile phones these days. A slideshow is a complete waste of time and space when it's on a mobile phone, to the point where people who have slideshows on desktop sites, quite honestly, these days tend to block those out on mobiles because they just take too long to load and they don't react well. Now, Google only measures really and ranks you based upon your mobile speed. So if you've got slideshows taking up that speed, then you really need to address that and remove them from your mobile sites at the very least. But I would actually say they look so naff and old now, you're better off just ditching them altogether. Number 2, Reconsider using a video background. And I say this because they look so beautiful. I've actually built some sites with them. They look amazing. But every time your website loads for someone new, it's downloading 52 megabytes of data. Or if you're using WebM as a video version, which is a particular kind of version of video that's much smaller in file size, you're still going to be downloading a couple of megabytes every time someone wants to view that. That slows you down. That uses up more data, and it's just generally not a smart thing to do. If you're going to get rid of slideshows, I would say get rid of the video background as well. I know you like it. I know it's pretty, and you're sitting there on your desktop computer or your laptop computer viewing it. This is not the way the majority of people are going to see your website. They're going to see it on a tiny little screen the size of this. And so when they do that, they're just going to want to be able to go, well, I want to see it fast. I want to get to the information I need and get back out. Nobody's really going to your website to experience an experience. They're really just going there to get information. So make it easy for them. Number 3, do you really need that photo gallery? Is your business so interesting that photo gallery is important to you? Now, if you're a wedding photographer, obviously a gallery full of examples of your photography work, very important. Keep it. If you are a financial planner, a gallery full of people who are celebrating in front of a computer, probably not so important. And if you're using lots of photos of your local area to make you appear more local, consider that loading time is going to slow your page down, which is going to bring your ranking of your page down as well. So I would say avoid photo galleries on home pages if you can. Unless you're a photographer, and this is very important for you to have photography galleries or video galleries on there, but most of us are not. So for most services and for most e-commerce sites and retail sites, you don't need galleries. Don't use them unless you absolutely have to use them. Number 4, are those animations really adding value? You notice I use a lot of animations in my presentations, but they are going across the internet as Canva presentations. They're not websites that have to load on tiny little mobile phones. So those animations are probably not doing the job you think they're doing. They look kind of cool, and they look innovative and different, and your competitors don't have them. But they're also slowing down your website. They use a thing called JavaScript, and JavaScript adds more bloat to your website, tells your browser to have to do more things and work out more processing every time, so that when you have maybe 50 different browsers open and you've got lots of JavaScript all being processed at one time and held in memory, you're going to start to have some problems. So consider whether animations on a website are actually adding any real value to what's going on, or they're helping to illustrate something better. If they're not, it's probably a good idea to just boot them off. Number 5, always use PNG files for graphics, but use JPEG files for photos. I say this because that's what the 2 different formats are very good at. PNG is not able to be compressed. PNG is only able to produce the data that it's got. So when it opens that file, it works really good with defined lines and graphics and text and overlays that are used rather than photographic elements. Photographs, because they use millions and millions of different colors, tend to be handled better by JPEG as a compression, because it makes the file size smaller. If you use that same file size, that same photo, and save it as a PNG, you'll notice the file size is much bigger, which means every time your web page is loaded, someone's having to load down more and more file size. The more file size, the slower that's going to be to load. And of course, the worse your rank is going to be on Google. So try to stick to PNG graphics and JPEG photos. Even better still, try and use the new much more web-friendly versions of photo called WebP, so web photographics. WebP, if you're able to output your graphics as that. I know Canva doesn't do it just yet, but you can convert it in other converters, and you can use things like Smush and Cloudflare particularly to convert to the newer versions of things. So videos, the thing is called WebM, and it's much, much smaller than a MP4. So consider using those if you can, but in the meantime, while they're still really the main way to do it, PNG for graphics and infographics, JPEG for photos. Number 6, design your site for the mobile phone first. Now, I know this goes against everything you want to do because you're sitting in front of a computer right now designing your site, and you look at it as a desktop site. The trouble is, as I keep saying, 80% of people who encounter your site are not going to see that version of your website. They're going to see the version that sits on their mobile phone. And when it sits on their mobile phone, they'll be looking and going, wow, this looks really cluttered, and I have to scroll for an eternity to find the information I'm looking for. So when it comes to that, we have a problem, because we're not reaching the people we want to reach, and they're not being delivered the information they're trying to receive themselves. So we really, really, really need to get out of this mindset that people view the website the same way that we as business owners do. They see it as a mobile site first, not as a website that's on a desktop or a laptop screen. So design first to make sure your mobile phone version is amazing, then add on features just for the desktop. But just understand that people use mobiles differently. They use desktops. That's something to get used to, because it means that people are generally looking for information fast and not trying to be wowed by an experience when they come in. So your website might look absolutely gorgeous on a desktop, but if it's really unusable on a mobile, then you're going to be in lots of trouble. Number 7, more content means slower loading, and this includes text. So if you've got lots of text loads quickly. So it's not quite so bad, but the more video content, the more graphic content, the more photographic content that you put onto your website, the slower that those pages with all that content are going to be. So if you want to add lots of content, I suggest you split your site up. Rather than having a doom scrolling, infinite scrolling front page that continually goes down and uses anchor links to connect everything to a menu, which makes the whole thing very, very slow to load, and it's going to get you ranked very poorly. Split things up into different pages. Have an about page, have a products page, have a services page, have a shop page, have a blog page, have a frequently asked questions page, but have them all as separate pages, so you can take all that content that you would normally put on one infinitely scrolling page and spread it out. It's going to be a much better experience for your mobile users, because they're not having to go scrolling down 300 meters worth of scrolling, and they secondly won't even have to do that on a desktop screen. Even scrolling that far is just not good for you and your customers in terms of their ability to convert or to converse with you. It's just not going to work out well for you. Number 8, we're getting to the business end now. Try to illustrate things with icons instead of photos. The reason is because icons have a tiny little bit of data attached to them. Photos have quite a lot of data attached to them. You could say you have a picture of a truck as an icon, and that could be worth about 1 or 2 kilobytes. In a photo, that could be 150 to 350 kilobytes. Vast difference. The icons almost are just code. In fact, they are just code. They're just something which is represented by a line of code, which is so much easier to do, much faster to load, and makes just as much sense when you're trying to explain something as a photo would. In fact, photos can be rather vague in what they're trying to explain. So too busy trying to show everything that's in that photo, as opposed to the very core point of it, which could be just a tick or a truck or a house or a target. That sort of icon can say just as much as a photo can say, with a lot less loading time. Number 9, try and limit the external content. And by external content, I mean YouTube videos on homepages, Facebook like boxes on homepages, and my least favorite is the Instagram gallery on the homepage. Instagram galleries, yes, they look beautiful, and yes, you want to show your Instagram because it's easy to update, and you think you're updating your website, but you're not. You're just updating Instagram. They are a huge problem on websites because their code changes all the time, because Instagram changes all the time. Instagram doesn't want to have your photos from Instagram shared on websites. They just want the photos on Instagram, so you'll go in and consume them there. So I know it seems like a quick, easy, lazy way around trying to get new photos onto a website, but it's just going to cause you endless problems with page loading speeds, and half the time the thing will go down. I work with one particular naturopath who has an Instagram collection, Instagram gallery on her website, and it literally goes down every 6 weeks when there's some kind of update, because Instagram doesn't actually want to do this. It does it, but really under protest. So really just limit those kind of plugins that come in with content from other sites. It's not going to do you any favors in terms of design, and it's definitely not going to do you favors when it comes to how much time it takes to load the website. And number 10, I would say, is probably a good thing to put across for any kind of a website developer, any kind of customer, any kind of business owner who's producing a website for their customers. Customize the experience on your website for the device it's being used on. People on phones like buttons for easy navigation and easy action for things. People on desktops like to click and use their mouse to move around. Very different devices, very different ways of using them, particularly for navigation. There's swipes and all sorts of things that happen on phones that you can't do on desktops or on laptops. So think about what your customers are going to be using and create an experience that matches the way they're going to use your website. So if they're primarily going to be going for quick information and to read an article or to get an update from your website, then using buttons to get around to those things is much more appropriate than using lots of images and putting previews of content on the home screen. The home screen on a mobile should be very uncluttered and very simple to just get you to the place that they need to get to. So takeaways from our design aspects and the on-page aspects of making a WordPress website run faster are design for speed. Make sure you take all those examples on board as how to design something that's going to load quickly, not just look good. You can actually make things look good and have them load fast as well. It takes a little bit of creativity and probably a second pair of eyes to make sure you're doing something right. Uncomplicate the content on your site by adding all these external pressures like Facebook like boxes and Instagram galleries, and adding galleries where you don't need them, and adding images where you can actually just use an icon to have a much faster experience. They uncomplicate your website, which doesn't just make it faster to load, it makes it quicker for people to use and consume your content. If they have to go through 10 hoops and watch for 10 things loading before they can finally see the information they want, they will go elsewhere, I promise you. So choose your content thoughtfully. Make sure that the content you're putting on there matches the expectations of the person on the device they're trying to use. And by that measure, I say think mobile first, not desktop. Don't build your website to look good on a desktop first. Do it the other way around. It doesn't matter whether it's with WordPress, Wix, Squarespace, or any other platform. Design your website to look good on a mobile phone first. Then go and scale it up if you can to the desktop. The technical optimization part of speeding up a WordPress site is not for the faint of heart. And sometimes it can sound a little too techy for some people, and they'll step away and run away screaming because they think only the IT eggheads could ever understand what all this stuff is. So my challenge right now is to help make this make a lot more sense to you. Technical optimization of WordPress means understanding a few core concepts. The first one being web server configuration and what that means for a fast website. The second is the concept of caching and how that speeds up your website loading as well. And the third is code minification or minimization. This allows you to have a lot less gaps in code. It's kind of like the version of shorthand, but for computer language. That's going to make sense very shortly. Let's get that started. First of all, let's look at your web server software. If you were watching the earlier part of this series where you were seeing what PHP is and all that, this is a bit of a refresh. But for those of you who are very new to the idea of what web server software is, particularly when it comes to how that relates to a WordPress site loading quickly, well, then I've got a bit of a treat for you. First of all, we look at the web server software as being controllable by you and by the web host. So the web host will control the server's operating system. They will control the web server software, which will be explained very shortly as well. And they have control over the versions of the MySQL database, or more recently, the MariaDB database. So it's a different version of MySQL, which is much more efficient and loads faster, particularly on, it's going to sound like gobbledygook, Nginx and Lightspeed servers. The things that you have control over when it comes to your web server software is the version of PHP, which is the language that is used to load your website. You've got control over that. Now, it's usually defaulted to the most recent supported version, or if you're using something like crazy domains, gosh, they've got it down like much earlier versions, and you have to manually go in there and update it yourself, even if they've got the most recent version, which half the time they don't. Then it comes down to you controlling also your WordPress version. So if you're using WordPress 4.8, you're way out of date. If you're using 5.2, 5.3, you're in a much better position. And then you also have control over the versions of the plugins and the themes that are used on your website. The things that make you able to do more things on your website is your plugins, and your themes are the things that make your website look good. Your website theme might be a page builder like Divi or Elementor as well. So all these things are things that you have control over. If we want to understand how the web service software that you don't have control of works out, we think about Linux, which is what they all run on. They work on a version of Linux, and we'll look at what those versions are and which versions are better and how to look out for those versions when it comes to a couple of slides forward. But think about it, your computer, it runs on either Windows or Mac OS, or you might have Linux running, but very few people do. Linux tends to power the web servers of the world. So it's a customizable, free, open source piece of software that's running what we call distributions or distros. Those distributions are different versions of Linux that different people have developed for different purposes. And we'll go through what some of those versions are that you want to be able to look out for if you're looking for really top quality, fast serving WordPress loading. Then it comes to the things that you would have on that computer that equate to what we call the web server software. So think about these as pieces of software like Microsoft Word or Google Chrome that allow you now to do something more than just open up a computer and work on it. You then want it to be able to open up to the world and serve web pages. And so the first one and the biggest used one, mostly because it's been around the longest, is Apache, which is that feather icon you can see there. Now, all of these web service softwares are kind of based upon the Apache principle, but Apache is not very popular anymore for running a lot of web hosts, particularly commercial web hosts that work with small businesses like you and I, because it's got limitations that slow it down and it stops it from being able to really effectively make like shared hosting environments like A2 hosting and Bluehost and HostGator and GoDaddy and all those. So what we find these days is the web server software is mostly Nginx or Lightspeed, and both of them are much quicker and much more capable of serving much more data and website traffic than Apache is. Then finally, in our stack, our web development stack, we're using then the languages, and the languages are things like HTML, JavaScript, and PHP. So what does this all mean? You've got to then look out for what your web server or your web host has in terms of what server operating system are they using, what web server software are they using, and what languages are they using, and which are the very best versions of those, particularly when it comes to the server operating system. It's got dozens of options. Web server software has got a few options as well. For WordPress site loading, we've got a few recommendations I could make for you. First of all, when it comes to the server operating system, which runs on Linux distributions, versions of the Linux operating system, the good versions are Debian, Mageia, ClearOS, and Oracle Linux. They're all very good. They work very, very competently, but the most modern and best versions and the ones you'll find much more constantly deployed on web servers is Ubuntu, Red Hat, SUSE, and CentOS or CentOS, just CentOS it gets called most of the time. Ubuntu and Red Hat and CentOS are particularly popular. Ubuntu is probably the most distributed Linux web server software in terms of serving through really good software. So most WordPress are going to go through Ubuntu or CentOS, and some more expensive ones might use Red Hat, which is particularly good for enterprise web serving for very large scale systems and very big, very busy websites. When it comes to your web server software, look for these names. Apache is good and LightTPD are good, but even better is if you can find out whether your web host uses Nginx or Lightspeed. The reason why Nginx and Lightspeed are there is because the amount of things they can compute at the same time and serve through is way, way higher than Apache. LightTPD is approaching Nginx and Lightspeed, but it is a very, very light version of a similar thing to Lightspeed. It's not a full version, it's kind of a light version. So it does load things very quickly, but it's particularly good at loading what we call static files, not dynamic files like WordPress sites that use a content management system. So we're just serving very plain HTML websites. Light TPD is amazing at that. Apache is good at all these things too. But if you really want the fastest possible service and the fastest possible loading of your website, you really have to look towards things like Nginx and Lightspeed to deliver those. Then when it comes to PHP, it's pretty good to run your website at 7.3 version of PHP. As at this date, which is December 16, 2021, it is still the supported version. But better is the upcoming supported version, which is already in the wild and probably the most used version of PHP, which is 7.4. But next year, get ready for version 8, which comes with immense speed improvements. When we first went from version 5.6 to 7.0, there was a fundamental change in the speed of websites and what they could handle with Joomla websites, WordPress websites, Drupal websites, any websites that were hosted on these Linux systems. What we found was that websites that maybe took 12 seconds to load were now loading in 5 seconds. The improvement was just dramatic, just from the version of PHP that was used. The problem was, though, that not all applications on your WordPress website, your plugins, your themes were made to work on that version. So I would say if you can move to version 8 now, do it now. But if you've got lots of old stuff and your website was built in lots of custom setups by particularly offshore, I won't call them sweatshops, but offshore developers who have made a lot of custom changes to your website, I would say hold off and stick with 7.3 or 7.4 if you possibly can. I've even seen versions of these websites that could not be updated beyond version 5.6, which is just plain dangerous. So if this is what I always say, don't use offshore call centers and offshore developer centers that are going to custom build everything. Everything needs to be built off the shelf in WordPress in order to make it updatable by you, maintainable by you, and understandable to the next person here in Australia who's going to be looking at the back end of your website and helping you out with it. Caching is another beast altogether. You've probably heard the term, or we might call it caching, or caching, as they might call it in America. The caching is, I guess, a way to make sure that reserves are there to deliver your site in the fastest possible way. It's the storage of website files in a handy, temporary place that's nearby in case you visit again soon. And this speeds up your return visit. Now, caching is done by two things. The first one is browser-based caching. Browser caching stores a version of your website files on the person's computer who visited it. So they visit the first time, all that gets downloaded to their browser and then stored there. So that if you're then moving around their website to various places, you go back to the home page, you're not having to reload that home page from scratch all again. You get a copied version of it that sits on your browser that loads instantly. So if you had to sit through 15 seconds of loading nightmare when you first went to their website before you could use it, the second time you go to that home page, you're not going to get that problem because that version of that website's now not coming from all across the internet. It's coming just from your computer. So it will load really, really quickly. And this works on a thing called time to live. A time to live setting is set by the web host and set by the person who owns the website to say, how long should you keep a version of my website on? If you are news.com.au or the local newspaper website, you'll want that time to live to be very, very short because you want people to get the news updates as they come through, as they keep going back to that site. But if your website doesn't really change that much, you'll find it's generally defaulted to 1 hour, which is 3,600 seconds. I would say there's even a better way to look at it. I would say a time to live, for instance, for most websites is probably more like a day or a week or a month because things don't change often. But when they do change, and someone goes there for the first time, they'll get that new version. But don't worry, even people who have had it cached in their browser tends to have the browser cache dumped every 30 days anyway, so they're going to get the new version regardless. The second kind of caching is called content delivery network caching. And this stores your website files closer to your visitors than where your web server is located. Remember before I was talking about Cloudflare and Bunny.net and Jetpack? This is exactly what those services do. They take a copy of your website, which might be sitting in the Ukraine, and it's now got versions of it in Australia, New Zealand, the United States, Africa, Asia, Southeast Asia, in Europe, in anywhere where there's people, there's now a copy of that website in that location. This means that there's less need for a person visiting your site to wait for all the downloaded files to come down from Ukraine. They're now getting it from Adelaide, or they're getting it from Brisbane, or from Perth, or from Melbourne or Sydney. Much more efficient, much faster load your files. But if you don't have this content delivery network, it's almost like every time someone goes to your site, they're downloading fresh versions of your files all over again, which doesn't help your bandwidth allowance with your web host and does not help your visitor at all, because this is the difference between a website taking 12 seconds to download and taking 3 seconds to download. That's the difference you're talking about when you take all those files and locate them more locally to where people are. In Australia, bunny.net and Cloudflare and Jpeg all have server locations in Perth, Adelaide, Brisbane, Melbourne, Sydney, and Canberra. They may, in some case, think bunny.net also has Hobart or Launceston, so it makes it a bit easier for Tasmanian audience as well. None of them, unfortunately, have a location in the Northern Territory, though that could very much change with 2 major international data cables coming into Australia, and companies like Rackspace setting up brand new server infrastructure, and NextDC setting up large-scale server farms in the Northern Territory to take advantage of that connectivity into Australia through Darwin's new pipes. So that's great to know all that information. What do you choose when it comes to those? For browser-based caching, you can choose plugins such as Lightspeed Cache, WP Rocket, which is absolutely brilliant, W3 Total Cache, and WP Super Cache. All 4 of those options are amazing, and I would encourage you to use them. But when it comes to the CDN caching, the caching that happens before people even get to your own website, then Jetpack is a free option, which I think everyone should use. I've found actually Jetpack CDN to be faster in the free version than Cloudflare's, and Cloudflare is excellent. But Bunny CDN is a phenomenal product and is paid, as is Securi, but they have lots of built-in extras like Cloudflare that have the ability to block people from denial of service attacks on your website. It blocks a lot of malicious traffic at the source, doesn't let them ever even see your website. And in some cases, these CDN also help in security matters to keep people from even seeing your website if they're in certain countries that you don't want to serve. If you only want people within Australia to see your website, you can tell all of these services except for Jetpack, so Bunny, Cloudflare, and Securi, to block all other countries other than Australia. This can really help you to hide from those hackers coming out of Eastern Europe and Russia and China. So it's really useful for that. Code minification is the final step we'll look at in the technical side of speeding up your website. Code minification is basically like, no, it's not coding. You don't have to worry about this. We're not going to tell you to code anything. It's just in your plugins. Jetpack does it. Cloudflare does it. A lot of those like Lightspeed and WP Rocket, WP Super Cache, WP Simple Cache, all of those plugins have this version of shorthand, which is taking all the gaps and all the additional words and text and code and squishing it down to the most efficient use of that. Now, will this make your site faster? Look, it's not necessarily going to do that. It means less requests for files required. It means less load time slightly, but it doesn't really make the page work all that much faster, particularly when you're using a CDN. What it does do is show Google that you are technically capable of running a lean, mean fighting machine of a website, and that it's built to best serve people who are looking for search results, to best serve the humans who are actually wanting to view those sites in the first place. But all these little changes, they do add up. So the ability to be able to add code minification for JavaScript, HTML, PHP, and then go and add a cache in front of it using maybe Jetpack or Cloudflare, and then also adding in a lot of the principles we've looked at previously, which are to do with the on-page optimization. All those little one-pointers, they add up to make a much better situation for you. My recommendations for an easy setup, use Jetpack because it's just a plugin that you set up yourself, and WP Rocket. will increase the speed of your website in a significant way. But to get the best value out of this, I've found that the best products I've used to speed up websites on WordPress is to use the business version of Cloudflare. It costs about $25 a month and gives you tons of different resources you can turn on and try to speed up your website so much more. And WP Rocket or Lightspeed Cache are both very good to use in the back end of your WordPress website to speed it up. So takeaways from this section is choose a better web host. You get what you pay for. Don't choose cheap web hosts because they're cheap. Implement some browser caching by using things such as WP Super Cache or W3 Cache or whatever those different ones are. Use a content delivery network, even if it's a free one like Jpeg. It will increase your page speed. It will make your pages load faster. And if you spend a little, you can gain a lot. $25 a month is not going to break the bank. I think even bunny.net is even cheaper than that. So if you can use those services to speed up your loading time, it can have a dramatic effect. Now, what you can expect as a result of all this is that you can have a website that can load much faster. That's obvious. But we want that website to load much faster. How much faster are we looking at? If your website loads in 5 seconds, that's good. Anything over 5 seconds is bad. Sorry to hear it. If you're loading in 12 seconds, you need some surgery on that site. Better is about 3.5 seconds. That's a lot better than 5 seconds. But if you can get your website loading in under 2 seconds, you're really doing the right thing. Now, my front page, my website loads in 1.3 seconds. That to me is incredibly important because that's loading my information in a quicker, faster way for people to be able to see it sooner and be able to consume it and get the information they need. Your HTML page size, if you see this in your stats, if you're about 40 kilobytes, that's pretty good. 33 kilobytes is probably the gold standard. But man, if you can get your sites to under 30 kilobytes, I got mine at 29 at the moment, then you've got the best possible position for your website to grow and be seen more. So basically, how does it work? What is the real effect of, say, a reduction of a website that used to load in 7.5 seconds to 1.3 seconds? And what's that done for me? That's exactly the thing that happened to me. I had 7.5 seconds of loading for my home page. It now loads in 1.3 seconds. That's all great and fine. What has it actually meant, though, in the real world? Well, you'd be surprised. You'd think it would be not even this big. But 95% more web traffic visitors from when I had the 7.5 second page load to now 1,200 visitors to my website every week, a digital marketing agency website. Crazy, right? What it means is 79 keywords that I wanted to aim for in my particular website are now in the top 20 search results. So I've got 79 items that show up in the top 20 for different keywords that I wanted to target. And 32 keywords of those are in the top 5 search results. So naturally, I'm getting a lot more traffic than I used to get before. Is it the right traffic? Yes, traffic is traffic because it leads to 90% more inquiries. 90% more inquiries. How would your business go with that? 90% more inquiries coming through. That's conversions. For me, conversions are mentioned of people who are going to sign up for a product. And that has meant 480% increase in conversions. Speeding up your website isn't just good for people to read it. It actually makes business sense. So where do you go next? You want to dig in more with a WordPress guide. We got tons of them on the Digital Solutions program. You can, for $44, access our Digital Solutions advisors at 3 sessions in 1 hour. You can access all these programs such as workshops and webinars, all of this at businessstation.com.au. And nothing you do, if you really want to get someone else on, for $44, you can now gift that. So if you go to businessstation.com.au, you'll see a link to be able to gift your business friend 3 sessions with myself or any of the other advisors on this particular program. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon or this morning or wherever you are in Australia or the world or even on YouTube. My name's Dante St. James. You can reach out to me to these details that are on the screen, particularly LinkedIn. I'm very, very, very active on there and I look for a lot of content up there. So please join me and I wish you a great week. And considering the time of the year that this is at, I'd like to wish you a Merry Christmas and a very happy 2022 as well. And I'll see you in the next one of these videos.